Okay, welcome everybody. First of all, I want to start out by some thanks to Alec Julian, who once again is acting as producer and engineer, and Patricia Julian for composing our music. And then I want to give an apology. And the apology is that in June and July, I did a series of 8 talks about the Endangered Alphabets Project. And they were scheduled at 2 different times, so they are more convenient for the US and more convenient for Europe. But both times are pretty inconvenient for Australasia. And so I'm apologizing to everybody from that corner of the world right now, especially as that is a region that is extraordinarily important to this particular field. Australia was, I believe, where the whole concept of endangered languages was first studied and written about 50 years ago now. New Zealand is the only country not about to gain independence that has actually considered seriously changing its colonial name to an indigenous name. The Philippines, I believe, is still the only country that is that has legislation under consideration for protecting, preserving, and promoting indigenous writing systems. And Indonesia has more traditional and indigenous writing systems than any other country apart from India. So clearly this is an area that of the world that's extraordinarily rich in my particular subject, and I apologize for having not connected with you better until now. So this talk is intended to be an introduction to the whole concept of endangered writing systems and emerging writing systems. At the end, when this is all over, we will make it available in recorded form, but I'm also going to email everybody who's registered for this particular talk with links to the more detailed series of talks that I did, as I mentioned, 6 or 8 weeks ago. That means that I'm going to slide over certain things rather quickly today that I really go into in a great deal more detail in that series, such as, for example, what is writing? Is writing a spiritual act? Is writing a form of art? And other deep and thoughtful questions. So today what I'm going to do is talk about how the Endangered Alphabets Project first started, but then I'm going to walk you around this small space here, which is the world headquarters of the Endangered Alphabets Project and gallery and workshop. And through the miracle of having both a laptop and a phone, both of which have cameras, I'm going to be showing you a number of things up on my walls and talking about them and the questions and the issues that they raise and suggest. As always, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. I'm looking forward to your questions, and I know for a fact that some of you actually know more about this subject than I do, so I'm also hoping that you will come in and make comments and pass on information as well. Okay, so the Endangered Alphabets Project began in 2009, 2010, and at first, it was really quite similar to what endangered languages approaches were. In other words, my aim was to research and document. I should stress that until that point, I had no background at all in linguistics or anthropology. I had stumbled on this entire notion, really, by a series of strange chances and coincidences, which you'll be able to read about if you buy a copy of my book. Highly recommended, and we're going to put up the link to that at the end of this Zoomcast. So what I did was I stumbled upon omniglot.com, which most of you know, and I was struck by how many of the writing systems there were no longer taught in schools, no longer used for official purposes, in some cases outright suppressed or banned. And so I thought I would carve a bit of text in a number of these, as it turned out, 13 of them. And the text that I used was the same. In fact, here is one of them right here. So this is Mandaic. And in the process of doing this carving exercise, I started discovering some pretty extraordinary things about writing systems and about writing in general. And so Mandaic, for example, is one of the most extraordinary writing systems in the world, in that every letter has its own secret mystical meaning. And in fact, the Mandaeans regard writing as a spiritual act in itself. And I should stress that I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more today. And I went into it in a lot more detail in one of the Zooms that I'm going to send you the link to. Where I really want to start today is with something that happened in 2011. So at this point, I had done my, my first exhibition, and people had said two things to me that I hadn't expected. They said, first of all, they said, this is art. And I hadn't really thought of it that way. I had seen myself as essentially just copying and documenting as a way to preserve and to present these images to educate people. And the second thing they said is, this is really important. You must keep doing this. And I had really thought of this as being a kind of a pre-senile monomania, where I was simply, you know, doing this to have something to do in my evenings, and nobody else would be particularly interested. And everyone said, no, you're wrong. You've got to keep doing this. And as it happened, in 2011, I had the chance to go to Bangladesh to do some public health work. And before I left, I put the word out on the internet saying, are there any endangered alphabets in Bangladesh? And people got back to me. And in fact, I owe the entire success of the endangered alphabets to people responding to me over social media. Said, yes, in fact, there's Mro, there's Marma, there's Chakma, there may be one or two others. And when I was in Dhaka, I was fortunate enough to meet some people from these ethnic minority communities. And the reason why I'm bringing this story up is because this is really what changed the endangered alphabets completely. So what I'm going to do is to pick up my phone. Excuse me if you get motion sickness here. So this now becomes camera 2. And I'm going to show you this one right here. So this here is Chakma. And Chakma is, yeah, good. Thank you. This is our enterprise is working here. So Chakma is a writing system that is centuries old. It is, the Chakma people are a very well established and respected ethnic community living in Bangladesh and India. Under British rule, they were largely self-governing, well established, and also literate. And I met a Chakma guy when I was in Dhaka. I'm not going to tell you his name in case there is some kind of retaliation. And this is the story he told me. Okay, Alec, I think we've seen enough of the slide. So what he told me was that he grew up in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh, which is an upland area in the south and east. And his father was a Chakma writer. He was regarded as being one of the great Chakma writers, in fact. And as such, he had assembled a library in his house of writing in Chakma, manuscripts and books, all kinds of things. And at that time, there was something approaching a civil war taking place in the Chittagong Hill Tracts because the government was moving Bangla settlers into that area and essentially dispossessing people who had been farming in that region for generations, even centuries. And if there was any resistance, the army would come in. And this guy told me that when he was about 6, the military came in, burned his house down, and killed his father. And all of a sudden, 3 things became clear to me. One was that at a stroke, that act had severed this guy's connection to his family history, but also had severed his connection to his cultural history, because he then grew up never seeing writing in Chakma and not, in fact, being able to read and write his own culture's script. He still can't. And the third thing that occurred to me was I had been observing this whole business of writing systems from a kind of a safe distance. And I really needed to get involved. That really made me move from sort of an observer to more of an activist. And in fact, over the course of the next several years, I collaborated with several people in the Hill Tracts to produce a number of carvings, certainly, but also, for example, this book, which is a children's illustrated dictionary. And each of the words, each of the images has the word not only in English and the national language Bangla, but also in Chakma and Mro and Marma and Tripura, because the Hill Tracts is a language community. It's not a monolingual place at all. And in a broader sense, the world is not a monolingual place, no matter how much those of us who speak English would like to believe it is. And so I came to this realization that you've heard of the phrase, history is written by the winners. So really, history is written by the winners in the language of the winners and in the alphabet of the winners. That actually means that those of us who are members of, a sort of a globally dominant culture are actually the very worst people to understand the importance of writing, because we can take it for granted and we can demand that other people do as we do. And obviously the same is true for language as well. And what I hadn't expected was that as I got further into the Endangered Alphabets project, I would not only be working to educate people about this, the fact that 85 to 90% of the world's writing systems are on the cusp of being forced out of use altogether. And when that happens, of course, as with my Chakma friend, all of the written history and identity of that community is lost to the very people who've created it. But I also discovered something else, which is that writing is actually much richer and more interesting than I thought it was. And I spent my life as a writer, so it's sort of a revelation that this this art or this tool or this device, whatever you want to call it, that I've been using, I really knew nothing about whatsoever. But that is actually pretty much a common state for those of us who speak English, who write English, who use the Latin alphabet. It's there. We can use it to, jot down notes, grocery lists, etc. We don't look at it. So what I'm going to do today is to walk around my condo and look at it and talk about some of the, as I say, some of the carvings that you'll see here, and some of the things that have occurred to me in the course of the last 10 years. Okay, so we're going to start off by walking upstairs. Again, apologies for motion sickness. We have the obligatory rabbit shot here. There's the rabbit. And we're going to look a little bit further around the downstairs a little later on. But the first piece I want to show you is this one here, which is in Nushu. And then I'm going to wander upstairs and look at a second Nushu one. They are so all over the place, Adinkra symbols. This place is littered. Okay, so the second one, so I want to show you this, and I want to talk a little bit about Nushu. Okay, so as some of you know, Nushu is the only script we know of that was created and used exclusively by women. To what extent it was a secret script, as it's often described, is not clear, because almost certainly the men in this sort of rural minority community in China didn't know about it, but that probably means also that they didn't care. Nushu means women's letters or women's writing. And the reason why this particular carving is in this sort of fan shape is that the characters were often painted or drawn or embroidered on clothing or on other media that were more accessible to women. And one of the methods was actually to use the panels of a fan. So that meant also that if a man came into the room, you could simply close the fan and the evidence would disappear. So this is part of an exhibition that I've carved, which says, "Thank you all," in 10 different endangered writing systems. And come the day when we actually have exhibitions again, this will be my next exhibition. The last sort of mother tongue user of Nushu died at the end of the 20th century, but because it has this beautifully calligraphic quality and because of its extraordinary history, there is a certain move afoot to at least use it as an art form, if not as a daily script. And the two films that we saw, the one I showed you at the bottom of the stairs and this one, are actually created by two young women who are typographers who have been creating Nushu fonts. And this is the kind of signs of life that I love to find and then promote and publicize. Okay, so moving on, the next one I want to show you is this one here. So this is an extraordinary piece of writing. It's not a letter. It's, I guess you would call it a character. So this is in Balinese, and it's called a pamada. And when I carved it, I didn't really know how significant it is. So all I knew was that there is no equivalent in the Latin alphabet, because, as I say, it's not a letter. It doesn't represent the voicing of a sound or isn't part of a spoken word. What it is, it's a kind of a marker, but it's more than that. It's a marker that says what follows is a sacred text. And in itself, I thought that's a pretty amazing notion. The idea that you would want to convey to your reader that the text that follows should be read in a different way. It suggests a sort of a seriousness of purpose or a greater openness of heart. But in fact, the pamada really is much more than that. The Balinese, like the Mandaeans and a number of other cultures around the world, they regard writing as a sacred act in itself. So What makes this such an interesting notion is that we're tempted to dismiss it as a superstition. So, for example, the fact that in traditional Balinese writing, you need to say a certain mantra before you open a book, before you start writing, before you make a correction or a crossing out. In fact, there are different mantras for different crossings out. And the fact that we might think this is just superstition is a sign that we've really lost sight of what writing is. I go into this in a lot more detail in one of my specific talks, as I mentioned. But very briefly, one way of seeing how poorly we understand writing is by noticing what happens when we don't think before we write. And there's a certain person who will go unnamed who is renowned right now for texting and tweeting without thinking. And the consequence is catastrophic. On a more spiritual level, the act of writing gives us the opportunity to pull together the best we have to offer. And for those of you who are writers or who've written a book in particular, you know how much of yourself you've put into that thing. It's not just, yes, here are the words that I need to say about this. This is something that for which you've had to dredge into everything that you have to offer. And to see that in book form, in a remainders pile, for example, or to see people treating it with disrespect, it sort of stabs into you. And in many ways, the Mandaean view, the Balinese view, a number of other cultures really recognizes that when we write something, especially when we write something with intent, with purpose, with value in mind, then we are bringing to it something that is more than just communication, that is more than just, here are the sounds of the words that I want to say. Okay, so strolling around again. So here on this expensive display stand are two other carvings I've done fairly recently, which also raise this question of like, what is writing exactly? So these are Adinkra symbols from Ghana. And this one is called Kwataki Atiko. And it is supposedly based on the hairstyle of a particularly valorous warrior. And like all the Adinkra symbols, it has a single visual éclat or impact, and it also has meaning. It's not writing in the sense that we think of writing. It doesn't represent a particular sound or a particular word, but it does represent meaning. And the meaning it represents is valor or courage. And these symbols were printed on fabric. They were part of the design of garments that were used by significant people for significant occasions. What makes this particularly interesting to me is that it really goes to show that if you regard writing as a means of representing an individual spoken language, then the circumference of that writing is limited to the area where that language is spoken. The Adinkra symbols are sort of like the road signs in Europe, where you can get seriously lost if road signs are written in words. And so the notion of creating a universal visual language seems to us like a modern thing, but obviously it's been going for some time. Moving on. This is another Adinkra symbol. This is called Siamese Crocodiles. And so here are these two crocodiles that share a single stomach. And so again, there's a kind of, it doesn't have a specific meaning as in this phrase is all that it means, but it does have a kind of a proverbial meaning, which it conveys with visual impact. And the proverbial meaning is, why should we fight and struggle against each other when the food is all going to the same place anyway? And so it stands for collaboration and cooperation. Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to take you over to the workshop. People say to me, you know, can you send me a photograph of your workshop? And so here it is. Yes, it's my kitchen counter. On the way, you'll see my workbench. So this is Javanese. It says, do good work. I thought I needed that reminder when I'm sitting there. And this is where I work. The yoga mat, by the way, highly recommended because it means things don't slip. So as you can see, these are the tools that I use, these little hand gouges, ordinary paintbrush, ordinary paint. And this carving, which is just pretty much finished, is actually from your region of the world. This is from Vanuatu. And so the Vanuatu sand drawings are also really right out there on the borders of the sort of the coming together or convergence of writing and art, because it's not only a decoration, it's not only a symbol, it actually has a set of meanings. And I've been told that what happens is that if a young man is in love with a young woman, then he will go to her house and kneel down outside and draw this in the sand. And as you can see, there's a heart shape in the middle of it. It's also a little bit like a sea turtle. Anyway, and it's sort of the visual equivalent of serenading, you know, of taking your guitar and playing underneath someone's window. It really represents commitment and intent to do something that is that beautiful and that skilled. And yet, unlike writing as we think of it, it is actually entirely transitory because it will get washed away or blown away very quickly. The performance is the crucial part of it. And again, that sense that the writer or the artist, both really, is there with intent and with purpose. And this, this issue of drawing in sand is also seen elsewhere in the world. And one of the places where it's seen is in Angola. So this is a sona. The Chokwe people have storytellers who use this extraordinary technique where they use their index finger and little finger as spacers, and they draw a geometrical pattern of dots. And then they tell a story, and the storyline is literally the storyline, because as they're telling the story, they trace around these dots in a pattern that never goes over itself again, never repeats itself, and ends up where it begins. So it's, if you've seen one of these, and I'll send you a link to an animation of one of these, you realize that my carving doesn't do it justice at all, because the carving is static, whereas the narrative and the drawing are extraordinarily engaging. And when everything comes together at the end and you see the point and it all hooks up again, the circle is complete or the pattern is complete, you realize that it's like a visual metaphor for storytelling anyway. This particular pattern as soon as I saw it and I saw what it was called, I thought, I have to carve that, because it's called The Man in the House with Two Women. And having lived in a house with two women and felt, rightly or wrongly, that it was my job to somehow make everything work and to keep the household running smoothly, I know what this is doing here. As you'll notice, the lines don't go through the two big groups of dots. They go through the smaller group, and I take the circles, the larger circle to be the house, and the next largest circle to be the man, and the smallest circle to be his head, and everything is going through his head. Of course, I could be completely wrong, and I'm just talking about myself, but that's what we do anyway. So that is a sona. Okay. So the purpose of the Endangered Alphabets Project is really multifold. It began, as I say, as an exercise in carving, even though I had never actually carved anything before. And as it has grown, it's really become an enterprise that aims to support anyone who is trying to save or revitalize or their traditional writing system, or to introduce a new one for their culture. And it's also become less and less about language and linguistics and more about social justice, because the importance of writing to a culture is something that, again, we don't really understand, because our form of writing is never seriously threatened. Luckily, I've been set straight by people from a number of cultures around the world who've talked about how much it means to them either to have their own writing system, which constantly provides a vivid and visual reminder of who they are and the fact that they exist. What I'm also doing is either creating writing systems for their own people, or who are developing typefaces and fonts and digitization or calligraphy, because all of those serve to convey the message that this writing system, it's not just something old in a museum, it's something that is alive. And so I'm going to walk across my room again and show you an example of that. So here we have a piece of text in the Baybayin script of the Philippines. So this is one of a number of traditional writing systems that predate the Spanish. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because this is not exactly how most Baybayin actually looks when you see it written. This is the product of an artist and tattoo artist and designer and performer called Christian Cabaway, who, when I first started the Endangered Alphabets, was just beginning to experiment with using this writing system, not just as letters to convey sound, but as visual iconography that represent his heritage in the Philippines, but also can be used as this kind of really dramatic set of visual statements, because most of us don't know Baybayin, and so it has that quality of drama and art about it, even if we can't actually read it. So this says mother tongue in Tagalog, and at the time that I asked him to write this for me, he was experimenting with sort of hip hop and graffiti style art writing. And so he sent it to me like this. And so I carved it and then painted it very much as he sent it to me. And of course, this raises some very interesting questions, because one of the reasons why a culture feels strongly attached to its writing is because of its connection historically with them. And so to start playing around with it and using it in different expressive ways is probably going to annoy some people. But as I said a couple of minutes ago, it's also a sign that this is a living script. It's changing, it's being experimented with, it's being used in art and performance, and it has that kind of live drama about it. I am all for preserving ancient documents or text carved in bone or stone, etc., because they really, as I'm going to show you in a minute, they really anchor a people in the history of the world and of their region. But I'm also all for taking that same writing and going crazy with it and having fun and being expressive. Okay, thanks. The last script I want to tell you about is a wonderful illustration of how a writing system can remain significant to the culture that created it, not only for decades, but for centuries and even thousands of years, even if the people whose writing it is can no longer read and write in that script. And I'm talking about a script that was developed in North Africa. There are stelae, there are stones engraved with this writing, which nowadays is called tifina, that go back 2,000 years, possibly more. It's deeply connected with Phoenician. In that sense, it's pre-Roman. And the people who used this script were the Amazigh people, who've also been called Berbers. And at one point, a couple of thousand years ago, they were static or nomadic or semi-nomadic all the way from the Canary Islands. This was their land. First the Romans, and then the Arabs, and then the French dominated that area and made the Amazigh not only retreat to some degree into the mountains and into the desert, but also they made them feel as if they were inferior, uncivilized. Anybody who wanted to present themselves as intelligent, sophisticated, would speak Arabic up until 100 years ago or so, and then it would be French or Arabic. And you could travel around this area and not see any of this writing anywhere, except the women of the Tuareg, right out in the desert, would use the letters and designs of this script in tattoos and in jewelry making. And so there was a sense in which it was being preserved and hidden in plain sight. In the 1960s, when the Amazigh revival began, a group of activists living in Paris decided that in order to pull together the Amazigh people from these various countries and to give them a sense of common identity, they also needed to have a sense of common history. And so they began a revival of this script called Tifinagh, but they did something else as well. So I'm going to use my other camera right here and show you what they did. They designed a flag. So this is the Amazigh flag. And at the heart of the flag, that character is one of the letters of the Tifinagh alphabet. That's the letter Yaz. So we know how powerful a flag is in terms of creating a sense of cultural identity and history, a shared purpose. And to put a letter in the middle of that flag shows how crucial this writing system is, even though many Amazigh people at that time could not read and write the Tifinagh script. That is starting to change. The government of Morocco, for example, created an institute specifically for research and teaching and the development of teaching materials in Tifinagh script in the Amazigh family of languages. But I think more than anything else, what this does for me, okay, we'll go back to my home camera now. What this does for me is to illustrate how much this is connected with a sense of belonging. So everybody needs to feel that they have a foothold on this earth. If they feel, if they're made to feel that they and their people are inferior, are primitive, are savage, are tribal, to use the word that's used in South Asia, that creates an extraordinary burden. There are other burdens as well, such as the fact that they have to transact their daily lives in something that is not their mother tongue, which creates all kinds of problems. I mean, we are fortunate enough that we don't have to use a different language to do our banking, to do our legal challenges, to help to get healthcare. We sort of take that for granted. In many areas of the world, that is not the case. So what one's writing system does is to visually reinforce, every time you see it, the sense that you are there. Starting about 10 years ago, Tifinagh began to appear on government buildings. Now, when you go to the airport in Casablanca, you see the name of the airport not only in the Latin alphabet and the Arabic alphabet, but also as if, oh yeah, we didn't think to mention that the Amazigh people are in fact not only a minority, they're a majority of the population in Morocco. And it's now as if they're sort of coming out of the shadows and being recognized. The last thing I want to tell you is a story that one of my researchers encountered when she was talking to somebody who was part of a kind of a minority of a minority in Eastern India. So the Sora people, S-O-R-A, are a minority in Eastern India, but within the Sora people, there is a subgroup that uses an alphabet called Sora Sompeng, which is another extraordinary alphabet in that it came about because of a dream or revelation in which each of the animist deities of the landscape came forward and gave the first letter of their name to somebody who then compiled them into an alphabet. So here you have a writing system in which each letter is intimately connected with their cosmology, their religion, their dance, and their music, because their chanting and their music includes the chanting of the alphabet. And my researcher managed to talk to somebody who was in their temple, because the language, the alphabet, is sacred. And I was asking all kinds of questions, and this person said to my researcher, "We are so glad that you contacted us. It means the world to us to be seen." And that's really what we're all about, is that if we can help people see their writing system and have their writing system seen, and in that process themselves feel seen, that's an achievement. So what I'm going to do now is to stop for questions and answers, but I also want to make an appeal to you. So if you feel this talk is worthwhile or has been worthwhile, I really ask you to support the Endangered Alphabets and to make a donation. At the end of the whole thing, Alec is going to put up a slide. Our website is endangeredalphabets.com. There's a tab there that says how to support us. If you can donate $5 or $10, that would be wonderful. That would help cover the cost of making this talk. Thanks. Okay, so now on to the fun part. Questions, answers, comments. And you can use the hand up function, or you can use the text function. Let's see. Okay, so Penny Voss, speaking Esperanto provides some perspective, even though the alphabet is not very exotic. Yes, so there's a really interesting question there. Do you try to create one universal language, like Esperanto? Or do you try to do the much more difficult thing in some respects and say, let's respect and identify as equal all of the individual cultural languages and scripts? And obviously, because of what I do, I'm a great believer in the importance of the individual script or language to the individual culture. But frankly, either of them is better than having a handful of languages or scripts dominating everyone and everything. Okay, Finn has a question, and Termi has a question. Okay, either of you, fight it out.
Go for it, Finn.
All right, I'll take it.
Go for it.
I had a question about the Vanuatu love symbol, for want of a better word for it. Is it always the same? So like the knotwork and the way it's woven and where all the lines are the same? Or is it more, this is a symbol that means that, but each individual person will have it like in the moment?
Got it. So I was really hoping there would be Vanuatu experts here today who would be able to answer that question. But I have seen multiple articulations of that and some of the other Vanuatu drawings. And what seems to happen is that they begin in the same way that the Sona begin with the person making the dots facing like this. They begin with a grid. So there's something like 4 vertical lines and maybe 6 horizontal lines, something like that. And then the articulation is based on the grid. So that part tends to follow fairly closely. The elaborations that move outside the grid are, I believe, more individual and more expressive. But yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's sort of like the research that was done with epic poetry, or, you know, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Oral tradition poetry, where somebody would declaim a poem one way, and then the anthropologist would go back and record it the following day, and there would be all kinds of little embellishments or changes, but the speaker would say, oh no, it's the same story, it's the same poem. Okay, Finn, jump in.
No, I'm Finn. Termy's the other one.
It's me next. Can you hear me first?
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, good, because I didn't know if my mic was on. So you probably know that I'm a bit of a fan of Cree syllabics and Canadian Aboriginal syllabics. Have you ever spoken to anybody about Australian Indigenous or interested in creating an Australian Indigenous alphabet? Because I'm not aware of anything like that here in Australia.
No, I have not heard of any person doing anything like that. And I have the sense, and I could be completely wrong here, that there might be opposition to that idea in that it would seem to be imposing an entirely different cultural tradition on a culture that didn't need to have a different cultural tradition imposed on them. So, for example, one of the best educated and most uncomfortable educational half hours I ever had was with two Abenaki women. So I had worked with Alec, and Alec had designed a font working with a number of the Abenaki in northern New England. And they were pretty happy with it, and people were saying, oh yeah, we're going to use that for all our signage now. But these two women said to me, ours is an oral tradition. As soon as you put it into writing, you're changing it. You're making it, so to speak, the white man's way of doing things. And they grilled me pretty hard on that for a while. And eventually what it all came down to was intention. If they felt my intentions were not to either make money off them or to change their tradition, but was to make knowledge of their language more widely available to people who cared to study it, then they decided they were okay with that. And interestingly enough, 9 months later, the first college level course in Abenaki was being taught at Middlebury College by one of the people who was on our design committee for the font. So I guess my answer to your question is I would want to take my cue from the people in that language culture. And if they wanted to go ahead and create a writing system, more power to them. But as I say, I haven't heard anything along those lines at all. And I suspect it's probably a hot topic. Okay, Dominic, you're up.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Hey there. Yes, yep.
Okay, good. I was just curious about the Soma people and their language. Could you spell that out for me?
So are we talking about Sona or are we talking about Sora?
So the people with the sacred alphabet created from the...
Oh, yes, yes. So that's the people are Sora, S-O-R-A, and the particular subgroup, their writing system is called Sora Sompeng, S-O-M-P-E-N-G. There is a wonderful book about them by a guy called Piers Vitebsky, and it's called The People Who Talk to Their Dead, or something like that. He spent, I think, best part of 2 decades on and off living with them. And when he first started living with them, which I think was the 70s, their culture was that they would hold protracted conversations with their departed ancestors. And those conversations would form a crucial part of their sort of individual and common decision-making and policy-making. Bit by bit, that tradition, unfortunately, has sort of waned and waned. They actually, they actually are referred to as the alphabet worshippers. And as soon as I saw that phrase, I thought, this is it. This is bound to be so fascinating. But Soros on pen.
Okay, thanks.
Question from Muhammad Samuel Islam. The number of scripts you have carved, can you read all of them completely? No, I can't read any of them. I literally, there is one word. I'm looking around the room here and I can see maybe 18 carvings, and there's one word of all of them that I can actually read, and that is suksma, which is the Balinese for thank you. No, I don't speak any of these languages, and I can't read any of these texts. And actually, without wishing to put too great a value on ignorance, the fact that I couldn't meant that from the very beginning, I was seeing these scripts more from a graphic and less from a semantic point of view, which meant that I was asking different questions than anybody who'd gone before. And so the very development of the endangered alphabets, first of all, has been entirely based on the kindness of strangers who have sent me things to carve. And then secondly, on the fact that I don't have that training in linguistics and anthropology. And so I'm not faced with the burden of actually trying to be able to speak and pronounce any of these things.
Good. That would have been too much.
Yes, exactly. Okay, other questions?
Termy has another.
Yes, he's being very polite and waiting until anybody else has come through. So anybody else before Termy jumps back in again? Okay, you're up, mate.
Awesome. So now that you've said that you look
And
at
by the way,
these...
let me say how nice it is to see you with light around you.
Yeah, I know, it's weird.
Like 4 o'clock in the morning when you join us.
Normally it's pitch black and my face just emerges out of the darkness. So now that you've said you see the alphabets from a graphical point of view, I'm going to ask you a semanticist question. Do you ever look at the order they arrange their alphabet in? As in, with the Latin alphabet, we have A, B, C, D. Because I've recently been looking at this for a few languages, and I found some interesting ideas for how they do it. Have you paid much attention to this at all?
Great question. You could write many books on all of the things that I haven't paid any attention to. But I had actually thought about that a whole lot, and I several times wondered, what do you do to a writing system in insisting that it actually has a sequence? So Mandaic is a really interesting example in that it's actually not a linear sequence, A to Z, but it's actually circular. It repeats itself. And so that the entire metaphor of alphabetical order doesn't work. And so therefore you see it. It actually, the alphabet rotates with the earth. It's an extraordinary notion. But tell me about what you have been thinking about, what questions you've been asking in terms of this notion of alphabetical order and sequence.
So with IPA, for example, it's got quite a structured layout, as do some other alphabets, where the layout is supposed to represent features in the sound. And some of the different ways for the Cree syllabics and Canadian syllabics also do a sort of similar thing. And they actually got really beautiful ways of laying it out. They don't necessarily
I've seen that. Yeah,
with the square and the radians and absolutely glorious. From a sort of structuralist linguistic point of view, I think that's beautiful because you can look at it and it will tell you information across the different axes about how you're supposed to interpret the alphabet. So I was just curious whether or not that had struck you with any of the other alphabets.
Right. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. Go for it.
So this also has really important pedagogical value. in that one of the things that you want to be able to do is actually teach your writing system to people who can learn it. And obviously this is at the heart of Hangul, the whole notion that the Korean script is based on how you actually shape the words. The same is also true of the Ditematsa-dinoku syllabary, where all of the symbols actually represent how to pronounce it. So you've actually got different geometrical shapes. So if it's a fricative, for example, it'll be this shape, and if it's a labial or a voice, it's the single most explicitly designed script in the world. It's just unbelievable. On the other hand, you also have other scripts which seem to give no sense that there needs to be structure to the writing system as a whole, because its only purpose is to represent sound. And then again, you have Han Chinese, where the priorities once again are completely different. One of the things that fascinates me is the kind of neurobiology of writing. Whether, for example, a musical note and a mathematical diagram and a letter are actually processed in the same part of the brain in the same way, because they all have different kinds of resonance and different sets of meaning. I don't know if anybody's done any research into that. Okay, so Finn said, what language was that with the cyclic alphabet layout? That was Mandaic. And if you go to endangeredalphabets.net, which is our online atlas of endangered alphabets, and you look through the A to Z index, there is a profile of Mandaic there. So that would be endangeredalphabets.net/alphabet/Mandaic. It is amazing stuff. Amazing. Oh, thanks. Alec has put the link up. Okay. Other questions? Olaf, you haven't said anything yet, which it worries me profoundly.
No, I just wanted to mention that the scripts are given names according to the actual sequence of the first letters, like Abjad, Abugida, Alphabet, Futark.
Yep, and if that isn't the case, then anthropologists do that. So I think it's Baibayin. Rommel, perhaps you can answer that question, where it was given a name which kind of meant the equivalent of ABC, and that because it was an anthropologist who had done that, therefore that became official, even though nobody local actually used that. There's a couple of examples of that as well. It's just amazing how much we imprint our beliefs on other people's languages and scripts.
I wonder another thing. Have you encountered Kuna writing?
How are you spelling that?
The researcher is Severi, Kuna writing from Panama.
From Panama?
Yeah, sorry, Kuna.
Huh.
It's a picture writing of stories.
Oh, it's Mesoamerican?
It's yet another writing connected to stories, which is interesting because there is a repetitive element in the pictures. Pretty much like the points that are made in the other writings you have shown.
Huh. Is this pre-Mayan or post-Mayan?
It's definitely post-Mayan, but we do not know the exact history. It's been described by this Carlos Severi, that's this researcher.
Huh. Yeah, I have another of our team is actually looking into Mesoamerican systems because the assumption is that A, they're all extinct thanks to the Spanish, and B, only the Mayan script had any kind of phonetic component. But apparently there's another one. So we are sniffing around the whole of South America to try and find out more about that. Okay, let's take one more question. Okay, we've got a nice thread going on in the chat right now. Anybody actually want to do an out loud question? Oh, you know what I need to do? I need to sort of just do a little bit of wrapping up here and say, right, so we have two websites, endangeredalphabets.com. That's where I'm hoping you're going to go, and you're going to make a small contribution to the Endangered Alphabets to support us in this Zoom in particular. And endangeredalphabets.net, which is our online atlas. A print edition of the atlas is going to be coming out next year. And Olesh, who is just talking to you all, is helping to do research in that and turning up all kinds of extraordinary things in the process. We also have coming up next year a book of Endangered Alphabet Sudoku, which is being published in conjunction with the British Library, no less. And a book of Endangered Alphabets word search puzzles, which I think we're going to publish ourselves. If there are no more questions, which I'm not seeing any.
Hello, Mr.
Yes,
I just have one thing.
No, hang on. Rommel just came in.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much. I do not really have a question. I just have a comment. I do like Christian Kabwai's art, but for someone like me who is really a novice at by buy-in, I'm a learner, it is difficult for me to understand
Yes.
what it is he's trying to convey. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and the same is true with calligraphy in general. So I'm looking to carve something next in either Tibetan calligraphy or maybe Mongolian. And the fact is that the more expressive it is, the harder it is to read.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I have this great kind of respect for tradition, which says that by in, you need to be able to learn it and read it and transmit it and all this kind of stuff. But then equally, you need to have like creative madmen who are doing all kinds of interesting things with it as well to show that it's alive. It's not like a fragment of parchment that's so delicate that you can't touch it or else it would fall apart. Anyhow, as I say, the Philippines is really leading the world in terms of trying to legislate the protection of writing systems. And for that, my hat is off to you. Okay.
Right now, it is in the lower house. I just want to say something else about the art. It is beautiful. The kulitan, we have a lot more people who are writing the kulitan version of the Asian Filipino writing, and they do it beautifully. That I can understand, though.
Okay, don't go away. I've got something to show you.
Okay, I'm using my phone, and I'm having difficulty reading that.
So this
is that Kulitan version?
No, this is Hanunuro.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's one of the Ambahan poems.
Yes, that is beautiful. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for what you do.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Alec is going to throw up our slide and direct you to where I'm going to go and our outro music. Thank you so much for joining us. Spread the word. I'll probably be doing a couple more talks next month, and I'm delighted to have seen old friends, at least faces, and new friends as well. So thanks for joining us, and stay safe, stay well, stay healthy.